Morning folks, I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters in the Pathfinder School. Welcome back to another in our series on gear of the 20th century woodsman. And today we're going to talk about one of my favorite pieces of vintage kit, the Stonebridge folding lantern. Stay with me.
Hey, I'm living good back in the woods.
Okay, before we start taking a really close look at this lantern, let's talk a little bit about history. This lantern was patented in 1906 by Charles H. Stonebridge. It was adopted by the U.S. Army Medical Corps during World War I, and there are some of these available in the market that I've seen. I don't own one personally, that have a medical insignia on them that were actually used in the military, and those are much more difficult to find than this galvanized steel version is. They are very difficult to find to begin with, that have all of the windows intact. And these windows are made from a mineral called mica. And it was flexible, and it was a little better for use and abuse as far as folding it up, packing it up, banging around the backpack and things like that than glass would have been, or some type of plate glass. So they used that mica material, and that was kind of an innovative thing that Charles Stonebridge did when he created this lamp. They made this lamp in three versions. They made it in a galvanized steel, which this one is. They made it in a brass, and they also made it in aluminum. And from what I've read, most people kind of didn't like the aluminum because they thought it was a flimsier material. It didn't hold up as well over time. However, the actual original Stonebridge lantern that's in the Horace Kephart collection that belonged to him personally was an aluminum version of this lantern. Again, I've never seen an aluminum version for sale, and I've never seen a brass one for that matter either, other than the reproductions on the market by Garrett Wade, and I'll show you one of those in a few minutes. I have one of those as well. But as far as originals go, most of the ones I see are this galvanized steel. It was a very popular lantern, even though it was patented in 1906 all the way through the mid-20th century, and it was still talked about by authors in books like The New Way of the Wild by Rustrum in 1957, I believe it was. Still mentioned this lantern is in his book as a viable piece of woodsman kit. But it started being written about very early by authors like Buzzacott in the Encyclopedia of the Outdoors, in Camping and Trails from 1910, and other books like Horace Kephart's Camping and Woodcraft also mentioned this lantern. So it's got a very historic significance in the field of the woodsman and the outdoor sportsman throughout the first half, at least, of the 20th century. So it's worth taking a look at this piece today. Okay, so let's get a little bit of a close-up view of how this lantern works. There's a couple things about this lantern that make it very unique. The first one is obviously that it folds up. And so we'll talk about that first. You would unsnap it here, and the lid would fold into itself here, where you have baffles to keep wind out, but also to let smoke out. You would fold that backwards onto the lid, and it would fold the lid flat, and you would fold the handle down. At that point, you had a bottom, which we'll talk about in a minute, that you could release inside by pulling up on this tab and pushing, and it would fold down, and then the whole lantern would fold over on itself, and sometimes it wants to fold one way better than the other way, so you just have to figure out which way folds the best on the lantern that you have. And it would fold down on itself, and then this clip would come over the top to hold it shut like this. And the whole thing weighed a little less than a pound without the candle. So now let's talk about a little bit of the innovations that this folding lantern had going for it. Okay, so let's speak to some of the features of this lantern. Now that we have it folded up, we'll begin to unfold it, and we'll talk about some of those features. On the back side of this lantern, you can see at the top, it has a grommet there, and that was for hanging the lantern on a nail. So once you opened it up, that part that became the back had a grommet in it, so you could hang the lantern by a nail. Again, the windows in this lantern are made from a mica, which is an actual mineral material. It's just a sheet of mica that is pressed into the galvanized steel to hold it in place. Now that makes it very difficult to replace, and that is one of the main things that I hear bad about this lantern. as far as people who are trying to restore these things, is that they're very difficult to restore if these windows are broken out of them. So if you're looking for one of these, look for one that's fully intact before you buy it, because you're not going to be able to replace this mica on the inside. It has a mirrored surface on the back side here to reflect. You can kind of see that reflection in the camera, I think. When you drop the bottom down, it snapped into place, and it had an adjustable device inside of it that would adjust to different size candles depending on the size candle you had available to you at your camp. It also had vents on the side that were adjustable to allow more or less air into the lantern. You can see this one's closed and this side is open, and they basically just, you'd reach inside and slide it side to side, just like that, to close the vent. It also had holes on the bottom to allow oxygen in so that the flame could draft. And then in the top, you had a housing that came down that blocked wind, but also let smoke escape. And it was spring loaded so that when you opened up the lantern lid, it would spring open on itself to come down over the top so that you could shut the lantern, and then you would just close by connecting that clip over the top. And then you also had a handle to either carry the lantern or hang the lantern on a rope or toggle if you wanted to. And again, you also had that hole in the back to hang the lantern. So it was a very unique design with lots and lots of small detailed features that made it so viable. And because of this flexible material that was used, this mica for the windows, it didn't break as easy when it was folded up, banged around inside your haversack or inside your backpack. It didn't get smashed up like glass would, because it was completely protected once it was folded by the lid and the back of the housing being galvanized steel. Now, if you can't find one and you want one of these for nostalgia's sake to carry around camp and things like that, you can buy a reproduction of this. And this is a reproduction that I've had for several years from Garrett Wade. And these are still available today for $50 to $70, somewhere in that neighborhood. It's a very close facsimile. It's a little bit smaller, but it has most of the features that the original had. It has the same stampings on the top of the upper housing with the patent dates and things like that say the Stonebridge automatic folding lantern. It has the same handle on the top, the same clip, the same hole in the back, and all of that stuff. When you pick it up, it has a little bit different roof housing. It has the mica windows in it, just like the original did. It has the fold down bottom in it. It doesn't stay in as well as the original one did. So you can pop it through there if you're not careful. If you don't keep that thing latched well, you can pop it through there. This one may just have a little bit of gunk on it. It does have an adjustable candle holder in the bottom of it. It does not have the adjustable vents. The top of it is not exactly the same. It doesn't have the windscreen that's spring loaded here, like the original does here. Other than that, it's very similar as far as that goes, and it does have the clip to hold it shut. So it's a little bit lighter weight version by a good few ounces, but it also has some things that are not like the original. But as far as having something that is a Stonebridge folding lantern for a vintage camp, this is a good bet if you're looking for one to buy and you want to buy a reproduction because you either can't find or can't afford to buy an original. And again, this one folds up fairly easily, just like the original did. This one actually folds a little flatter than my original, but it's also been stored for quite a bit of time too. And I would imagine if I had some heavy weight on the original, it would fold pretty flat too over time. All right, folks, well, I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters and the Pathfinder School, and I appreciate you joining me today for another in our series on Woodsman's gear of the 20th century, talking about the Stonebridge folding lantern. I appreciate your views and I appreciate your support. I thank you for everything you do for our school, for our family, and for our business, for all of our sponsors, instructors, affiliates, and friends, and I'll be back with another video in this series or another series as soon as I can. Thanks, guys.